All right, we are live with Omar Shahine, corporate VP at Microsoft. Omar, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Tom. It's great to see you.
Yeah, for the audience out there, Omar and I worked together in early 2000s on Hotmail,
hmm
and I still quote something you used to say to me when I was in product planning and you were in program management. And I would say like, "Hey, how hard would it be to do this?" And you'd always say, "Well, it's software, so anything's possible." It's just software. I still remember that. How have you been in the ensuing 20 years?
Great. I moved to Seattle. I think that's right around the time you moved on, and
Mm-hmm.
I loved living up here. Having spent 10 years in the Bay Area, I traded good weather for bad weather. But other than that, lifestyle's good, family's great, my kids are doing well. Microsoft's been doing wonderful. Uh,
Yeah.
so it's been great. Yeah,
Yeah. You definitely pay less taxes up there too.
much less.
Um, I do. I kind of went the opposite direction. So after 13 years in Seattle, I went to Europe, but now I'm in the Bay Area, and definitely enjoying the sunshine and the Mexican food.
hmm
But trying to buy a house, and it's very hard to do that up here.
Yeah,
So there's always pros and cons.
absolutely. Yep.
Now you kind of experienced a few phases of Google because of Microsoft, because when we worked together, we had Bill G still in the picture, Ballmer, and
hmm
now you're under Satya, and I'm guessing they had different styles. I'm curious what you can observe, like you thought was like some strengths from those different eras of Microsoft.
Yeah. You know, people, especially senior people, they tend to aspire and model the behaviors of their leaders.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think Steve was a very energetic, and amazing business person. But the company kind of languished for a number of years.
Mm-hmm.
He made a lot of really good bets right before he left, though, Azure being one of them, that I think sort of Satya inherited some really good, like foundational bets the company made. And I think under Satya's leadership, those have done exceptionally well. Steve started the transition to subscription, cloud, SaaS products,
Mm-hmm.
but Satya's really, I think, grown it tremendously. But I'd say the biggest difference is Satya took a very long view on programming the culture of the company to be very different, and to he sort of believes in the growth mindset concept. And I think
Mm-hmm.
my experience under Steve, and you'll remember this, is PMs at Microsoft were like know-it-alls.
Mm-hmm.
They were smart and they were very convicted. There wasn't a lot of empathy for customers. There wasn't a lot of curiosity, and there was no experimentation and learning from your product. There wasn't really even any focus on creating product market fit. You kind of built software and then packaged it up and shipped it, and somebody else took care of selling it and servicing it. So I think the biggest changes have been the culture, and that was I'd say 5-year journey when he first stepped into the role, and it also required, it's not like he mandated things. There wasn't a top down. It wasn't a top down push. It was create an environment in which people like me found opportunity and success in focusing on culture and investing in culture. And for people that didn't want to do that, I think they left.
Yeah. How did that happen? It wasn't like he made a presentation one day saying like, we're going to change the culture.
Yeah.
Like what were some of the things that you noticed where, like looking back, these were key things that were important to kind of
Yeah.
help evolve that?
I think it was very calculated. I think there was I think, there was a strategy. I think the strategy was a multi-year strategy. And I think there were specific like waves of programs. And I'll just give you an example. So I remember a couple of years ago walking into the conference rooms, and they had these stickers in every conference room, and it had like growth mindset and fixed mindset. And it had like how to run a meeting with a growth mindset and a fixed mindset. And it was like examples of growth mindset and fixed mindset. So, go to meetings every day for weeks and weeks and weeks. And, you see these things and they just kind of make you wonder like, like, what's this growth mindset thing? And, at the time, my daughter was like in first grade, and she came home one day and was telling me about growth mindset. And I was like, what are you talking about? And she's like, oh, we're learning about growth mindset in school. And I was like, I'm learning about growth mindset at work.
What are you learning? Yeah, that's right. That's great.
And so I think, Microsoft rolled out this thing called the 10 inclusive behaviors. And there were 10 things like ensure all voices are heard, be brave. And leadership started to think about like, hey, could we all adopt one of these inclusive behaviors? Like, what does it mean for Omar to ensure all voices are heard? Like, what does that mean in a meeting? And what does that mean in an email conversation? So, you start having these discussions in your LT meetings, and people start talking about like, well, what inclusive behavior are you practicing this month? So it was like really different to work in a company where people weren't talking about tech, product, business. They were talking about like, how do you show up as a leader? How do your people see you? And then there was a focus, of course, on like building a diversity pipeline that was helping bring in diverse talent. There was a focus on retention of diverse employees and how you need to create an inclusive environment in order for people to ensure all voices are heard. And so it was a process of building up, starting small and introducing things that people could understand and facilitating, some trainings. And they put all the senior leaders in the company through Microsoft leadership principles training. Like the company actually sat down and said, there's 3 leadership principles we want our leaders to have. One is create clarity. The second is generate energy. And the third is deliver success. And they sort of put everybody who is at partner level and above through a 2-day training where they walked through these things in depth. And I've never been part of something like that before. It was really cool. And so anyway, that was 5 years ago. All that stuff started then. And just people get better and better and better at these things when they get the opportunity to practice.
It's amazing. On those principles in that, our mutual friend, Zia, who we used to work with, he's now at Amazon, and he talks about their principles. Like, I mean, I feel like they tattooed it on him. Like it's so ingrained, and I don't remember that being it being that way when we worked together at Microsoft in the early 2000s. I felt like then it was more about winning, about beating the competition, and being the smartest guy in the room and making sure like your stuff was rock solid. And it sounds like it's really kind of changed. And curious, did they introduce any changes to like how people get promoted or rewarded to kind of reinforce this type of culture, or was it more kind of through modeling it and stuff like that?
Yeah, they did, but it's kind of nuanced. So they introduced this notion of a diversity and inclusion core priority. So, every person in the company is expected to write down a way in which they're going to learn and grow along the axis of diversity and inclusion. But that doesn't like help you figure out what to do. You kind of need to be exposed to opportunities and learning. So I'd say a lot of individual teams took on the accountability of identifying opportunities and programs. So there was a lot of grassroots stuff that people did, which I thought was I think is one of the best parts of the culture transformation, is not so much that the company had all this top-down stuff figured out. It gave more permission to people to spend time, which meant business impact shifted from the things you described to actually focusing on the business, the culture impact in the team. And then, yes, like absolutely in my team, for example, when we do promotions, we have discussions about what was this person's impact on our team culture, like, and how do they show up? And what's the feedback from their peers? Like, are they an inclusive leader, or are they somebody who we used to talk about, like, leaves a wake of bodies, along the side as they deliver success, So that stuff's just not tolerated as much anymore. People, I think, are more comfortable challenging other people when they see behavior that is not in line with our, our values. And it's wonderful, but I would say it wasn't formulaic in that sense. It was more give people permission to explore and create their own, like, lived experiences around focusing on inclusion.
Now, some people watching this are probably thinking to themselves, like, well, that's all warm and fuzzy. How does that actually drive shareholder value? Like, do you feel like there's a clear path from this type of culture to getting kind of business results and growth?
Yeah, I mean, take a look at the stock price. I think that's the clearest indicator of Microsoft, for a period of time. I've not checked in the last week, but, becoming the most valuable company on the planet, or in the top, 1, 2, or 3. The answer is yes. But it's a good question, because a lot of people, there's the moral side of why inclusion is good. There's the business side of why inclusion is good. Different people focus on the different things depending on what helps them understand the value. But, the way I think about it is we hire a lot of people, and historically they'd come into the company and we wouldn't be open to their perspectives and ideas. And that's just a shame, because people learn a lot of really valuable ways of working, tools and techniques. And Microsoft, I'd say, was kind of insular for a long time. Everything had to be done here and invented here, and our tools and our processes. And so, embracing what people bring to the table has really helped, I think, has helped us grow. And then the other thing is Google did this fascinating study on teams, like back in 2015, what makes them successful. It was published online. They did another one on what makes managers successful. And Google's conclusion was psychological safety was the number one ingredient of a successful team. And it's like, well, what is psychological safety? Well, it's the ability for someone to join a team and feel like they can give feedback and ask questions without being humiliated, or being, feeling small, or, being ashamed. So I think I sort of subscribe to that. Like, I actually share, every time I hire someone in my team, I meet with them and I go through the whole framework that Google came up with about psychological safety, dependability, clear goals, and clear structure and goals, impact of work, and meaning of work. Like, those are the 5 things. And I do that with every single new employee. Because I think psychological safety is the key for people to contribute their best, which is what gets you the best business results. If you have 100 people and each one of them feels like they have an opportunity to be innovative, and for people to respect and welcome their input, you get better results.
Totally. Tell me a little bit, Omar, about your career path over these years. What did you do right out of undergrad? Like, where did you get started?
So I was a biology major, and I was pre-med, and that was what I did in college, for no other reason than I thought being a doctor would be a good idea, and I'd make money and be successful and happy and safe. But I actually got rejected. I got 21 rejection letters my senior year from med school. So it was like very clear that there was something about my candidacy which was universally viewed as, inadequate.
What do you think that was? I'm surprised that that happened.
I think people figured out I really didn't want it for the right reasons. And there are too many people that want it for the right reasons that did a better job, that had better grades, had better scores, So that was my big hitting the wall moment. And I had a side gig though in college. I did a lot of what was the time back then, like community based. I built a community site for a Microsoft product, which got the attention of Microsoft. And I had a mailing list. Today that would be like a Facebook group, but I had a mailing list on the internet where people would discuss this product, and I ran it. And so I ended up getting an internship after I graduated, and at the end of my internship, they offered me a PM position. I didn't know what PM was. I was actually a test intern. And when I joined Microsoft as a test intern, I was like, what are these people that write specs and invent the future? Like, this is like magical. I want to do that. So I basically was an apprentice at the time. I went around and learned what I could about being a product manager. And I got an offer at the end of my internship. And it is also a really interesting moment where I realized Microsoft was hiring me based on my capabilities, not based on my experience.
Right.
Not based on my grades, not based on my degree. And I was like, wow, this is so odd. I didn't know this could happen. One of the people I worked with didn't graduate from college. I was very smitten by how Microsoft sort of hired people and gave them this responsibility of being product manager or developer. So that's how I got to Microsoft.
And then, so you're apprenticing, and did you start on the program management ladder, or were you originally in PM? And how do you see those two?
Okay, so at Microsoft, and still today, we call the role I have program management. That kind of maps to product management at, say, Google or Facebook or Apple. But it's we're in process right now of like redefining and evaluating the job role to align way more closely to what you find in the industry. Because the traditional program manager role at Microsoft was a mix of product management and project management. Like, I don't know if you remember, but a lot of what we did when you were working with me was like running the trains.
Yeah.
Like keeping the engineers on task, on schedule, managing bugs and triage and like all these things that we don't do anymore. The engineers do that. We focus on goals, OKRs, working with customers to get clarity on their needs, working with design and research, running experiments, analyzing data, working cross-company on cross-company initiatives. So that's what product management is more about today than it was 10, 15 years ago. But I've been a PM the whole time. So 22 years basically in the same job discipline.
Do you guys still have product planners, or is that role gone?
No, the job of product planning basically is split somewhere between, we have business planning. So business planning is basically studying the market, determining what the TAM is, building SKU proposals, building packaging proposals, doing research on what customer intent is for pay, willingness to pay, and how to expand our market. And then PMs took on the rest of that product planning work.
Got it. Love it. And so what was you started out as an apprentice and now you're a Corp VP. What were some of the drivers for your kind of traversing that career ladder? Because it's quite a long ways that you've come. Yeah. Starting at the like entry level in the company, it's very humbling, actually. I don't have any friends that have worked at the same company as long as I have. So it's a little bit unusual, and it's a long journey. I will say that, but it's very fulfilling. And if I reflect on like most of my breakthroughs in career were happy accidents, being sort of in the right place at the right time, and some opportunity presents itself, and you're the person that some senior individual thinks of and comes to mind when they are considering an opportunity. And so you kind of get asked, hey, would you like to do this? And would you like to do that? I didn't really seek a lot of job opportunities myself proactively.
they sort of appeared, but they didn't really appear. I think the way I think about it is you work anywhere long enough, you're going to have sponsors, people who are looking out for you and putting you in candidacy for certain positions where you don't even know that's happening. Like you're not aware of it, you're not in the conversation, but they are in a position where something comes up and they say, you should consider, Omar for that job. So I think my career was largely driven by my investment in like building relationships with as many people as I could, being as helpful as possible to other teams and other people, like being generous with time and feedback. And honestly, being a learner, like practicing curiosity often so that you can build more and more context and knowledge about your business, your customer, your product, your industry. So I think the growth mindset culture we have today is actually very aligned to the kind of the approach I took to my career, which was just to learn as much as possible.
And when you were tapped on the shoulder for opportunities, I'm guessing those are the kinds of opportunities that are very high potential, but super challenging and ill-defined. How did you make sure you delivered when they said, take this on, and you said, okay?
That's a really good question. Ambiguity sometimes is the biggest, the best ingredient for opportunity. Something that's not well defined. And the first time that happened was when I moved up to Seattle in 2009. This is when I was working on Hotmail. About a year after being in Seattle, I got asked to consider being a GPM for this team. The team actually had no name. It was like, had some meaningless internal name. But at first I was like, well, I want to be a GPM, and I was offered a position. So I immediately said yes. And I was like, well, I'll figure out what that team does later. Cause it doesn't make any sense to me right now. Then that team ended up being the OneDrive team. It sort of OneDrive at the time was called SkyDrive, and it was like 1/5 of the thing this team was working on. And 6 months into the job, one of my friends, I don't know if you remember Mike Torres. He was a GPM too. He got a similar opportunity, and he worked on my sister team. And we both were like, well, this is really confusing. Why aren't we doing more with the SkyDrive product? Like, Dropbox was a year old at the time, and they had this great little sync engine that would do this magical thing. And we had this product called Folder Share and Mesh, and Microsoft was building all these fragmented solutions. And so there was a lot of ambiguity in the space, and nobody had figured out what to do. And so we sat down, I remember the weekend, it was January 2010. And we sat down and wrote a 3-page document that said, this is what we think we should do. It was a strategy document for OneDrive. And we shared it with some people. And this was in the Steven Sinofsky era. So we were doing this a little bit unorthodox, planning had already concluded. So there wasn't any appetite for two kids with the right idea.
Right.
But we had good support from our leadership, and we decided to, we got the stamp of approval, and we started building OneDrive. Now we made a lot of mistakes in execution, which slowed down our progress. But the product today is largely a result of that strategy document we wrote. And I would say that was the probably most defining thing that happened in my career, because it's sort of put me on a path to work on something that turned out to be a big category in the market. And our product ended up being a big player in that market over the course of the last 10 or 11 years.
So let's unpack that a little more, because you wrote that 3-pager on the weekend. Nobody asked you to do it, really.
No.
And this is past, the book of Wave X and all the plans and everything's already locked in. And here you're saying, oh, actually, no, we should do this instead.
Yeah.
Well, tell me about what the initial reaction was like, because that seems Like the white blood cells would kind of just go after it and say, this is out of schedule, like get
Yeah,
with the program.
they did go after. It was really risky. It was probably the biggest risk I took.
Yeah.
Both took, but we both felt like we were given this opportunity and we didn't want to squander it. Like, GPM at the time, group program manager, is like the most senior position you'll have where you have ownership over a product, right? So it's like the dream job for every single PM in the company eventually to get to, if you want to own a product. You want to be a chief product officer in a big company. And so we both were freshman GPMs and very knowledgeable about the industry and very passionate and convicted that like this was the right thing to do. And so I guess, I don't know, we didn't really think too hard about the consequences of this, but like the first reaction was, why didn't you figure this out 6 months ago?
Why now? Yeah.
Yeah. Like, how inconvenient. We've already sent the memo and the formed teams and reorganized everybody. And we have a 2-year plan. And here you are telling us like, it's no good. And we're like, yeah, it's no good. But we enlisted, like, we didn't just show up with this doc. We actually socialized it with our peers. Like, they were supportive, and our manager at the time was supportive. So I'd say we built consensus that this was much better than the plan that we came out with 6 months ago. And I think they saw us as like brand new and like, oh, we want a success story for putting 2 new people in these roles. Like, it's important to show that it is safe to challenge the status quo and propose something different.
And where was Microsoft in terms of its cultural evolution at that point? Was it
still the old culture? Yeah. Like, I mean, the reason I say our execution on the strategy was poor was we were in the Windows organization and we were embarking on a plan to ship iPhone and Android apps and Mac OS and Windows apps for Windows XP. So not on strategy. Like, none of that was on strategy. But I think there was an understanding that this cloud thing was going to be a cross-platform thing. So, our approach was like, we got to be great on Windows Phone. We got to be great on Windows. Like, that's where our P1 focus has to be. And then we're going to like carve out a like small team to work on this iOS and Android app. But no, we got a lot of bullets. Like, there was a lot of unfriendly fire. And we had leadership to help us and guide us, and there was some support, but it was a bumpy road. We made a lot of compromises on the product as a result of that strategy. And Windows 8 and 8.1 were not a success. Like, so we were part of that. Like, we were part of creating that operating system, and we had to go on that whole journey of like realizing how that was so sort of non-customer driven, non-customer focused work. So anyway, it was pretty tough.
And I'm guessing there were authors of the original strategy who probably put a lot of time and effort into it. What was it like kind of socializing it with them, and how did you eventually either get them to buy into it or at least stop resisting?
They left. Yeah. They were leaving anyway. We do these massive reorgs. I don't know if you remember those.
I think I saw one or two. Yeah.
Musical chairs. There's 10 people, but only 8 chairs. So I think a lot of people just found other things to go do. There was definitely a changing of the guard to some degree, new regime coming in. So we were part of that, I guess, new regime.
Yeah.
And so we didn't have that problem so much that round.
And so did that strategy, as it started to get traction, sounds like did it solidify your kind of role as a GPM, and then you started to think broader, or what was it like after?
I think it's solidified. I like to talk to people about, you think about your career arc. I would say like most people are spending the first 10 or 15 or 20 years of their career on mastery, mastering skills and mastering capabilities of product management or whatever. So, I was in that phase of like mastery, working in the cloud, learning to build a massively distributed system to store very expensive content, for Microsoft, and selling storage, learning about how all those things work together, building on a brand new mobile platform, iOS and Android. So I'd say that phase of my career was really instrumental in helping me build really important skills around being ahead of a product and working with other stakeholders in the company. And that phase lasted until I'd say 2015, 2016, so the OneDrive team was moved into Office, and then we became part of the OneDrive and SharePoint team. That's the team I lead, I lead program management for today. And so, mastery took 8 or 9 years. I spent that entire time as a GPM. And then I stepped into the role I have today, which is like more of a director and eventually CVP. And that job is all about purpose. Like, what is your purpose? Why are you here? What are you here to do? It's not about building product. It's not about being a chief product officer. And so I see a lot of people make that transition. Most of the time it's like 15 to 20 years into their career, where they're now in a position to focus on. I had a definition of purpose, which I thought was really great, which is purpose is about investing in the well-being of others. And so that's kind of how I see my job today is investing in the well-being of my direct reports and their products, portfolios, and their product leaders.
And what's that transition like? You spent so much of your career being the person to pull it together and make it happen. And now you're in this kind of new rarefied air.
Yeah.
And I'm guessing you must have some muscle memory. You had to learn some new things.
Yeah, it's really confusing. The first year is really, really confusing because there's no job description. It's like, figure it out. And then I think what I figured out, and by the way, the more senior you are, the less and less time you get with your manager, right? So it used to be, you start out, you get one-on-ones every week. Maybe it's an hour. You grow up, you get one-on-ones maybe every 2 weeks, and then it's like so you get very little time with the person who's coaching you. And so the question is like, where do you get your feedback from? Where do you get your coaching from? And I guess, what I figured out was I got a lot of it from my direct reports. Like the people that work for me are the ones that shaped where I focus my time. I sort of see myself as working for them to a large degree because my job is to enable their success and their opportunity. Of course, that has direct benefit to me as well. And then my peers, like I have 3 peers that together we run the team with my manager. And I, shifted my focus to investing in the overall team itself and my peers and like, how do I help them? But imposter syndrome is the worst possible thing when you're in the transition like that, because you're really doubting yourself. You're like, why did I get this job? I don't have any of the skills. I don't have any of the experience. My mastery is all about making products. But, for me, I'd say I was encouraged by learning that like most people feel that way. They have that imposter syndrome as they're navigating new challenges. And I was very sort of transparent about what I was going through and just created an environment of where I think people for me. And the most important thing I learned actually is asking for help. I was not in the habit of asking for help. asking for help was sort of like a sign of failure, you know, like you were incapable of figuring it out on your own. So you're bad.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think I learned to ask for help. And I learned to build relationships with people that could complement my, not deficiencies, but my areas of growth, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And then I learned from them in doing that.
What were some lessons that you learned in that transition that still, are applied today and have made you more impactful?
One of the lessons I learned is don't get in front of my skis. I have a tendency to try and anticipate things and try and figure everything out by myself. Like someone's leaving the team or there's this, problem. And so trying to get into a mindset of like not knowing and figuring out how to build more like more capacity. Again, it gets back to learning and curiosity, like focusing on asking questions and getting to the heart of issues and trying to understand things at a much deeper level before shifting to like problem solving. I found that in retrospect, I waste a lot of energy solving unneeded problems, like things that don't even need a solution because maybe they didn't happen, right? So there's this book called A Coaching Habit, and Microsoft actually had all of its managers go through the trainings, how I ended up coming across this book. And one of the things the book teaches is to be lazy. And I was like, wait a minute, you mean I can be lazy and successful? Sounds wonderful. But the book basically makes this case that when someone comes to you with a problem, instead of understanding their problem and asking them how you can help, you start solving the problem for them.
Yeah.
And the problem with that is you don't actually know what the problem is that you're solving. You don't have a deep enough understanding of it. So you're just wasting calories. And then they're not growing. Like you're not actually helping the person who came to you grow because you're doing the work for them. So I'd say that's like one of the biggest shifts and transitions I had to make was being strategically lazy, which means just being curious and withholding my like natural tendency.
Yeah.
And asking questions, and it's actually works amazing. Like, and it feels great. And and then I sort of figure out, okay, like I think we know how I can help you, or maybe we just learned that I can't help you, that you have all the tools you need to solve this problem.
Do you think that applies to understanding customer problems as well, or is that mostly an internal thing? Because sometimes I find that there's these schools of thought of, hey, you should be really customer driven, customer obsessed.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's another school of thought, which is like, well, Henry Ford said, if I ask my customers what they want, I'd want a faster horse kind of thing. We should just like innovate and they'll catch up to us.
Yeah. I think it's both. I think customers will tell you exactly what they want, and you could build exactly what they want, but then I think you'd be making a mistake. What I try and think of is good product managers are good listeners to customers, but they're able to synthesize and pattern match solutions to like a broad, lots of inputs. They're not, the specificity of their response is not, what's needed. It's more, do they observe a pattern or an opportunity that is maybe needs some synthesis of a broad range of customer feedback. The second thing is you can't really fulfill the unmet need if you're asking your customer to tell you what that is, like, because they don't know what it is. So I think a lot of the magic in software development is the innovation that comes from identifying the unmet need, right, and pursuing that, and having the strategic patience to fail along the way of pursuing that, because you tend to fail on the way to great greatness, great success. And so the question is, do you give up when you fail, or do you take the learnings from your failure and iterate on the product to get it to the point where it does sort of achieve the goal that you had in mind? So I think, I don't know if laziness is the right word with customers, because you're really not trying to get them to do your job. You're trying to get them to provide you the right insights into their problems. And I think it's good to understand like their workflows, their patterns of working. And I say this really mostly coming from the commercial space.
Mm-hmm.
I think the consumer space is quite different. That's mostly about addressing the unmet need in a lot of cases. And I think a lot of the learning there comes through experimentation, because people's behaviors are not often matched or correlated to what they tell you.
Yeah, I mean that the difference between enterprise and consumer, it seems stark in some ways, in that I feel like in consumer products you can flare a lot and try a lot of things and you get tons of data back. With enterprise, it's a much longer cycle, and the workflow, as you mentioned, is so kind of sacred. How do you think about innovation in enterprise product development?
I don't think of it as really any different. I think the most important thing for innovation is obviously you have to have people who are obviously smart, and they need to be inspired. Like inspiration is the fuel for innovation. I see a lot of teams at Microsoft and other companies where the team is generally focused on the fundamentals, like they only have capacity for the fundamentals, like the dial tone work. And those teams end up with, this like poverty mindset where they can't be innovative because they believe that they have no opportunity to be innovative, right? They spend all their calories on these fundamentals. Mm-hmm. So I think it's important to create space for it. So like as a leader in my team, it's important I create space and opportunity. And then I also make sure our team isn't 100% focused like on priority zero work. Like you need to be more, at that point, you're not resourced correctly. Like if 100% of your team is on P0 work, that's terrible. That work's going to slip. People are going to be angry. They're going to yell at you. They're going to be upset. You're not going to be feeling successful. So you kind of need to get to a place where you have enough capacity so that the team actually has the opportunity to focus on what they identify as what their customers want, what they identify as their interesting and exciting ideas. And then there's all these stakeholders involved in a big company, this VP who runs this team needs this from you, and this one over here needs this for you. And, she needs something from you as well. And you add it all up, and it can be very, really challenging with all of this work in your backlog. So I like to think of what can you do to create an environment in which people are inspired and excited, and then fundamentally motivated to be innovative.
What are some of the ways you do that?
Well, I think you have to encourage the newest and most junior people in the team, right, to have opportunities. And one of the things we do in our team is we have these weeks called Fix, Hack, Learn weeks. They're basically like 1 week long. Think about them as like hackathons where the team doesn't have meetings, and there's no expectation that people are writing code that gets shipped to production. They get to do whatever they want. So they have like full agency. They get to prototype things. They get to fix bugs in some cases if that's what they want to do. They can do their email if that's what they want to do. But the point is, like, everybody's in choice about how they spend their time. And then we do demos at the end, and like we celebrate. And some of the best ideas in our team have come from those weeks. And it turns out you have to artificially insert these into the calendar. Otherwise, it's just a grind. It's like 52 weeks of a grind, right? Vacations alone aren't going to help you. So introducing that helps the organization pause. And the next thing we do is we have like planning twice a year. like focused planning, where the whole organization plans. And we don't have a lot of top-down mandates. Like we have some, I won't lie, like big organizations mandate things that need to get done. But we allow the team to propose ideas, and then the leadership team gets together at the end of planning, and the team basically spends 15 minutes pitching or sharing, what the outcome of planning was. And it's very exciting. Everybody gets excited about it because, Tom comes in and shares the idea he worked on with 10 of his peers.
Mm-hmm.
So those two things are probably like the scaled ways that we do that. There's, dozens of other things that teams do, that I don't have visibility into, like demo days and things like that. But at my level in the organization, those are the things that we created.
Omar, we have some questions that we've been collecting from the audience as you and I have talked. I can't believe 45 minutes just flew by. Thank you again. But let's see if we can hit some of these before we wrap up.
Sure.
So, earlier in our conversation, we're talking about, culture and inclusion and promotions and that kind of thing. And question here about introvert, extrovert. I actually just finished a book about introverted people. I think it was called Quiet or something like that. And, there's a lot of people who aren't naturally, extroverted, but they have a lot to add. Any thoughts on that?
Well, I'm introvert. I'm an introvert, proud of it. There are a couple of ways people describe this in promotion discussions. We talk about hidden figures sometimes. Who are the people that are not garnering all the attention, but doing incredible work? So it's like, we actually have a very healthy dialogue in my team about who we sort of introduce this topic about who are we not talking about, and what are they doing, and why aren't we talking about them and their impact. So that's like one focus. The thing I talked about, the 10 inclusive behaviors, ensure all voices are heard. The pandemic has actually opened up a path for people who tend to be quieter in meetings and not as comfortable, saying something or raising their hand. We use Microsoft Teams, and so the chat in Microsoft Teams is like this thing that happens, and then it's almost like its own meeting. There's all this conversation happening in the chat, and then there's this meeting happening on the screen.
Right.
It turns out a lot of people who I'd say like self-identify as introverted are way more comfortable sharing their thoughts in the chat. And so one of the things I can do as a leader is just pay attention to people who are making suggestions or asking questions, and sort of call on them, or say, Sarah in the chat asked a question I thought was really good. So I think leaders can play a really big role in elevating voices of people that have a harder time. And so, back to the original question, I don't think it's just so much about promotions as it is about the culture you're creating in the team, and making sure everyone has this opportunity to contribute in a way that feels safe for them. And so I think leaders play a big role, and they own that safety. And then in promotion discussions, we talk a lot about, business impact, customer impact, and culture, team impact. And so people can show up differently depending on where they delivered impact, for their career. It doesn't have to be all about, the product and the business. It can be other things too.
Great stuff. And I totally agree. I do want to underscore, it takes leaders like you to go out of your way a little bit to see that, because other left to just inertia, it's the loudest people will kind of dominate the conversation.
Yeah.
I can tell that you've embraced this culture very well. Wes Wu wants to know, hey, I feel being generous and helpful to build relationships and in sponsors is something that's often missed when PMs are being evaluated on just impact and numbers. And you had mentioned in our conversation that, you try to be generous with your time, you try to be helpful, and that has contributed to you kind of being on people's radars when opportunities pop up.
Mm-hmm.
How do you think about that? Because, there's a lot of lot of OKRs that they're also accountable for. They got to ship their thing and they want to land big impact, and they don't have time to reply to all these emails from people that
Yeah,
are, yeah.
this is a great question. So we do this thing in our team. We have a written template that people have to fill out. And one of the qualifications is collecting feedback from your peer, the person's peers, and then their managers, right? So we don't promote people without that. And it's really critical because you're not doing the person's like OKRs and their business results, but you're also evaluating how do they show up to the engineers, the designers, people more junior than them, people more senior than them. So we cast like a pretty wide net to make sure other people's perspectives are included in the discussion about promotion. Now we make decisions based on like lots of inputs, that being one of them. It's not like, I want to be careful to say that promotions are not popularity contests, right? It's not about everybody likes you. But it's important that we get, 360 views on how somebody works, right? Do they, do their peers have a positive view of their impact and how they collaborate and work with them?
Makes sense. Mary Ann has a question about when you're interviewing candidates for roles in your org or on your team. What do you look for?
The answer to this actually it's a recent discovery, because I think I've learned in the pandemic that there's a real grit. The grit's the number one thing I look for. And it's because we need people who can work in an intense environment, because technology in general, there are a lot of intense environments and jobs. And you need to be someone who's not going to fall into like a state of learned helplessness where you're looking to someone else to solve problems that you identify. So I really value people who have pushed through and created visibility or clarity about problems, and asked for help of leadership. But I'd say like grit is a really important qualification to be successful. It's not a qualification to be hired. I think a qualification to be successful. That for senior people especially.
How do you evaluate grit from an external candidate?
I think examples of where they've had really tough, like intense experiences, grinding through success. Success is not a big bang type of thing. Usually success is a series of small wins. Like, what are those small wins? Can you describe them? How have you navigated challenges and headwinds in your career, whether they're organizational headwinds or product headwinds or strategy headwinds? So I'd say it's like really digging into how the person deals with challenges and ambiguity, and examples of success, and having a really good perspective on that success. Like I like it when people can postmortem their success and describe what they personally did to contribute to success, right? And failures are great. Everybody can talk about failures and what they learned, and it's really important. But I actually think people often are successful without knowing why.
Totally. Last question, and it kind of relates to the grit one. Sounds like grit is something that you've recently honed in on as something that really is important. What are some other skills or traits that you look for in great product folks?
The most important things are passion. I've worked on things I'm passionate about, and I can't imagine working on something I'm not passionate about. I think I would not do a good job. So I think curiosity is another one. Like, are you capable of understanding your market, your competitors, your customers, your peers? You have to be curious, really, really curious, to get to a level where I think you can be great at your job. People who are not curious, in my opinion, are not going to go as far. And I think curiosity and learning are kind of related. The last one is, I'd say gratitude. You have to practice gratitude to be successful you need to be somebody who is good at recognizing people's impact and work. It's not sufficient to just focus on yourself and your work, because if you feel successful, it's because somebody else helped you feel successful. And so I always think about, are you investing time in helping other people in your team get recognized for their work? I think it's one of those most powerful things you can do is to use your privilege or a position of authority or whatever to actually shift the spotlight to somebody else. Maybe because they're on your team, maybe it's an engineer on your project, maybe it's a designer. That's how you build equity in your relationships, and that's how you build, trust. And I think, you build success by having a group of people that see you as somebody who's generous with feedback. And I think it also earns you the opportunity to give critical feedback in a way that is going to be heard and recognized. If you're somebody who's really generous with feedback and does a good job recognizing it, well, when you don't like something, that person's going to listen and probably feel invested in acting on the feedback. But if you're not doing that, and you give critical feedback, why should I pay any attention to that?
That is such good advice. I remember maybe 5-6 years ago, I was joining a new team, and there was a leader who was very generous in their kind of acknowledgement of great work that was being done. And at that point in my career, I was still like, well, what's that all about? Things can always be better. Let's just keep pushing harder.
Yeah.
And I looked at that as softness, but now I totally agree with you. That's someone who's trying to spread the positive energy, acknowledge, deep down, a few layers down, and then when they do have constructive criticism, it probably is heard in a way that's different than being said by a leader who's always just criticizing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, think about it as it doesn't cost you anything.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's 30 seconds of your time to say, you did a great job. Or, if one of your colleagues gets promoted, what an amazing opportunity to congratulate them and make them feel like you see their work. People want, especially now in the pandemic, by the way, where we don't run into each other, people feel less seen, right? It's hard. It's hard to feel like people can see you in your work.
Amen, brother. Well, Omar, an hour went by in a blink of an eye. I really appreciate you giving me your time and, on this fledgling podcast, but hopefully folks who are watching this live and later on replay will take some lessons learned and pay it forward.
Thank you for the time. It was great to catch up with you, and love sharing all this.
Oh, brings back memories seeing you again, Omar. You haven't changed a bit. Whatever you're using for your anti-aging regimen, also, we'll have to do that in the next show.
I think it's genetic. Sadly.
I love it. See you later, buddy.
All right. Take care. Peace. Bye.